The combat hall was quiet. The bright lights reflected off the polished metal floors, and the soft hum of the machinery filled the air. Rows of cadets stood in formation, their uniforms sharp, their posture perfect. They were ready for a simple test, one they had done many times before. Today was supposed to be routine, a standard combat scan that measured reflexes, strength, focus, and intelligence. It was something that every species went through, something that always went the same way. No one paid much attention when Aaron Cole stepped onto the platform. He was human, one of the rare few allowed to train at the Galactic Defense Academy. Most cadets didn't know much about humans. They had been told humans were ordinary. Average in strength, average in speed, average in intelligence. Nothing special. That was why no one expected anything unusual from him. Aaron himself didn't think of himself as special either. He just wanted to complete the program and learn what he could. The scan platform was large and circular, with lights that moved over the body in a slow, precise pattern. Aaron stood in the middle, waiting. He could hear the quiet whispers of the cadets around him, curiosity, maybe some small doubt, but nothing serious. It didn't matter. Humans were known to survive and adapt, yes, but in combat they were nothing remarkable. At least, that was what everyone believed. The system activated with a soft hum. Sensors extended from the ceiling and the walls, scanning his body from head to toe. Small displays lit up along the walls, showing numbers, percentages, and charts. At first, the readings were normal. Reflexes slightly above average, strength within normal limits for a human, intelligence steady and consistent. Then the system paused. The lights on the platform dimmed and the hum slowed, almost as if the machines themselves were confused. Aaron felt a small flicker of unease. This had never happened before. The cadets around him murmured, whispering to each other. The instructors moved closer, their expressions changing from mild interest to curiosity. Then the system recalibrated. The lights brightened and the hum grew louder. The displays started flashing new numbers, ones no one had seen before. The colors shifted from green to yellow to orange, and the readouts began spitting out classifications that seemed impossible. An old warning symbol appeared on the main screen, blinking slowly. It was a symbol that had not been used for decades. A symbol that many cadets did not even know existed. Alarm flashed in the eyes of the instructors. Some of the older cadets recognized it immediately, and a quiet gasp ran through the hall. Aaron looked at the symbol and then at the instructors. He did not understand what was happening. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this. He had been told that humans were average, that they would pass or fail like anyone else. Now, every sensor in the hall seemed to be pointing to one shocking conclusion. He was not average. The chief instructor, Reltan, stepped forward. He was a tall figure, with years of experience written into every line of his face. His eyes were sharp and calculating. He leaned slightly over the display and read the classification. His lips tightened. He tapped the console and tried to override the system. Nothing worked. The system kept showing the same words again and again, founder-level human detected. The hall fell silent. Even the hum of the machinery seemed to pause. Cadets stared at Aaron, uncertain what to do. Some stepped back slightly as if the very air around him had changed. The instructors exchanged nervous glances. Who approved this human? Reltan finally asked, his voice low but firm. It carried across the hall like a ripple in water. Aaron blinked. He did not understand the question. I don't know, he said, his voice calm but filled with confusion. I was assigned here as part of the exchange program. The instructors murmured to each other. Nobody had ever seen this classification before. It was not listed in any recent records, and the older archives were mostly forgotten. Humans had always been documented as average. How could one scan detect a level that even the instructors thought was a myth? Reltan motioned for the system to show more detailed analysis. The screen began to fill with complex charts and data. Aaron's body measurements, neural readings, reflex patterns, and psychological indicators were all displayed. Every reading seemed normal in isolation. There was nothing extraordinary about his muscles, nothing remarkable about his reaction times, nothing unusual about his intelligence score. But when the system combined all the data, it painted a different picture. Aaron's ability to adapt under stress, to process multiple threats at once, to plan, to survive, these were off the charts. Far beyond anything the system had been designed to measure. The cadets whispered among themselves. Humans had always been underestimated. That was part of the reason they had survived for so long. They adapted quietly, learned quickly, and were underestimated by every species they met. But this was something else entirely. Aaron felt a strange calm as he looked at the display. He did not feel powerful or superior or even special. He simply felt that this was the way humans had always been. To survive, to adapt, to keep going. It was not about winning or being the strongest. It was about enduring when others could not. The warning symbol blinked again. It seemed to fill the hall with a quiet weight, as if the machines themselves recognized something long forgotten. The instructor stepped back, unsure what to do next. They were trained for every scenario, every type of threat, every unusual reading, but this was new. This was something beyond their understanding. Aaron shifted slightly on the platform. The scan continued, but the system was no longer calm or methodical. It moved faster now, calculating, analyzing, trying to understand a human it could not categorize. Each sensor reading seemed to surprise it. Every measure of endurance, intelligence, adaptability, and resilience pushed the system further beyond its limits. Finally, the chief instructor raised a hand. The room went quiet once more. He looked at Aaron, and for the first time he saw not just a human, but a symbol of something older, something deeper. "Stay on the platform," Reltan said quietly. "Do not move until we understand this." Aaron nodded. He had no choice but to wait. He did not know what the next steps would be or why this had happened. He only knew that the scan had revealed something that no one in the room had expected, and that perhaps no one had seen in centuries. The cadets watched him with a mix of awe and fear. In all their training they had never encountered anyone like this. A human, standing quietly, scanning complete yet somehow incomplete, ordinary yet extraordinary. The lights dimmed again, and the machinery hummed with renewed intensity. The display continued to flash the warning symbol, and the words appeared once more. "Founder-level human detected." Aaron looked at it, and for the first time he understood. Humans had survived when others had fallen. Humans had endured when others had failed. Humans had hidden in plain sight, underestimated by all, quietly shaping their own story of survival. And now, it seemed, the galaxy was being reminded of that fact. Instructor Reltan stared at the display, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. The words glowed across the screen, "Founder-level human." The letters seemed almost impossible. He had seen thousands of scans in his long career at the Galactic Defense Academy, thousands of cadets from dozens of species, each with unique strengths and weaknesses. Some were faster, some stronger, some smarter. But this reading did not fit into any chart, any known classification, any history he had ever studied. The room shifted uneasily. Cadets whispered among themselves, exchanging nervous glances. Some shuffled slightly in their boots. The air, once calm, now seemed heavier, as if every molecule was aware that something extraordinary had just been discovered. Aaron Cole stood still on the platform, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him. He had never been the center of attention before, not like this. He glanced around, confused. Cadets he had trained alongside for weeks now stared at him with expressions that made him uncomfortable. Some were afraid. Others seemed amazed. A few tried to hide smirks of disbelief. It was as if they had just discovered a secret that had been hiding in plain sight. Aaron's own training had prepared him for pressure, for unexpected situations, for challenges that tested both mind and body. But this was different. He had no idea why the system had labeled him a founder-level human. He had never even heard of such a term. Humans were ordinary. That was what everyone believed. That was what he had been told all his life. And yet, the display was glowing with words that contradicted everything he had ever known about himself. Reltan took a deep breath. He was a man used to authority, used to control, and used to understanding the patterns of countless species. But now he felt something he hadn't felt in decades: uncertainty. His hand hovered over the console, unsure whether to try a manual override to cancel the scan, or to call for an emergency meeting. Nothing seemed right. "Who approved this human?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. But his voice carried across the hall and every cadet froze. The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Aaron swallowed. He didn't know how to answer. I was assigned," he said slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm part of the exchange program. I didn't approve anything." Rel's eyes narrowed further. The exchange program was controlled, strictly monitored. No cadet was allowed into this part of the academy without multiple levels of approval. And yet, here was a human standing on the scan platform, glowing with a classification that had been considered myth for centuries. The instructors whispered among themselves. Their voices were low, quick, filled with uncertainty. They had protocols for unusual readings, emergency overrides, and malfunction procedures. But nothing prepared them for this. Humans had always been measured, documented, and classified. They had been studied carefully, considered ordinary. How could a human suddenly be labeled a founder-level entity? Aaron felt the tension in the hall. He had always known humans were underestimated. That was part of the reason they had survived so long on their home planet, against predators, disasters, and other humans. But he had never thought that the galaxy would suddenly realize it in such a dramatic way. Rel-Tan motioned for the system to display more data. Sensors hovered over Aaron, scanning again, recalculating. Every line of numbers and symbols moved faster than before, as if the machines themselves were struggling to keep up. Aaron could see the cadets leaning forward, trying to understand what was happening, but it was clear that no one knew what to make of it. "Show the detailed reading," Rel commanded. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of urgency. "Everything the system has detected. All levels, all scores, all adaptations." The console flickered, and the data began streaming across the screens. Aaron could see his own measurements laid out: muscle density, reflex speed, neural processing patterns, cognitive adaptability. All of it seemed normal at first glance. Humans were average, maybe slightly above in some categories. Nothing remarkable. But then the system began to combine the data. Neural readings paired with reflex speed, endurance paired with strategy response, adaptability paired with stress handling. Suddenly the numbers began to climb. Far beyond what was possible for an average human. Far beyond what was considered possible for any cadet. Far beyond the limits of what the Academy had measured in any species. A hush fell over the room. The cadets stared at the display, their mouths slightly open. Some of the younger cadets had never seen an emergency warning. Others, older and wiser, could feel the gravity of what was unfolding. The system was registering something it had never encountered. It was struggling, recalculating, and still coming back with the same shocking conclusion. Aaron remained still. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel superior. He simply waited. Humans had a long history of surviving situations that seemed impossible. They adapted. They endured. They observed first, acted second. They learned from every mistake. That was their strength. Not power. Not speed. Not size. Survival. Endurance. Adaptation. Rel-Tan turned to the senior instructors standing behind him. Their faces were grim, some skeptical, some awed. "This cannot be correct," one of them muttered. "Humans were never this level." Rel shook his head slowly. "The system doesn't lie. The sensors do not fabricate results. Every reading confirms it." His gaze returned to Aaron. You are showing capabilities that we have only read about in history texts. The founder-level human. The legends. But you are here. You are real. How?" Aaron shrugged slightly, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "I don't know. I never thought I would be anything like legendary." He paused, then added softly, "I've just trained like everyone else. I try to learn, to survive, to improve. That's all humans do." The room fell silent again. Cadets exchanged uncertain looks. Some were impressed. Some were frightened. Some couldn't understand how an ordinary human could be something so extraordinary. Rel-Tan finally motioned for calm. "Everyone step back. No one is to touch the platform. No one is to interfere with the scan. We need to verify these results, understand what is happening. This is not a drill. This is not a simulation." Aaron stayed on the platform, standing as still as possible, feeling the tension in the room grow heavier by the second. He had no idea how long the verification process would take, or what the instructors would decide next. All he knew was that this was the moment when humans, so often underestimated, were finally being seen in a way that no other species had experienced in generations. The system began to output historical comparisons. Aaron watched as the data showed the few times in history that humans had reached near this level. Survivors of disasters, explorers who had endured hostile planets, soldiers who had survived impossible battles. It was never documented officially. It was anecdotal, scattered, almost myth. But the system had found it. The cadets murmured among themselves. Whispers of disbelief, awe, and fear moved like small waves through the hall. Aaron could hear them, but he did not react. He had been underestimated his whole life. The fact that others were realizing it now did not surprise him. Rel-Tan studied the data, reading every line, every score, every comparison. He had dedicated decades to understanding interstellar species, their strengths, their weaknesses, their limits. But here was a human, standing quietly, showing capabilities that no other species had demonstrated in centuries. Finally, he turned to the assembly. "Prepare the secondary scans," he instructed. "We need full analysis, cross-referencing every historical record available. This human cannot be ordinary. We need to understand what we are dealing with. Aaron nodded slowly. He had no idea what would come next. Perhaps he would pass unnoticed as humans usually did. Perhaps the Academy would adjust its records and life would continue as normal. But something told him that things had changed. Humans were being remembered in a way they had not been in generations. And as the sensors hummed around him, recalibrating again and again, Aaron realized that perhaps the galaxy had finally caught up to what humans had always known. They were not ordinary. They were survivors. They were adaptable. They endured. And now, the rest of the galaxy was being forced to notice. The Academy archives unlocked on their own, as if recognizing the significance of the moment. Screens flickered to life, showing records that had not been accessed in decades. Scrolls of old text, holographic images, and historical logs appeared in the air, forming an intricate tapestry of information. Every instructor and cadet in the hall leaned forward, eyes wide, as the archives displayed events that were long thought forgotten. Aaron Cole watched quietly. He did not move or speak. He simply observed the streams of data floating around him. Most of it was historical records from long before he was born. Records of humans on distant planets, of conflicts and disasters that had tested the species in every conceivable way. Each record highlighted events that other civilizations had long forgotten or chosen to ignore. The first record detailed a massive collapse on an early human colony. Supplies had failed, communications were lost, and the environment had become hostile almost overnight. Other species in similar situations had perished entirely, but humans had not. The logs showed careful planning, cooperation, and a relentless drive to survive. Every obstacle had been catalogued, every failure turned into a lesson. By the time the data concluded, the colony had been rebuilt, stronger than before. A cadet whispered behind Aaron, "How did they survive that?" Aaron turned slightly and met the eyes of the cadet. He smiled faintly, though there was no pride in his expression. "We adapt," he said simply. "We figure things out. We don't give up." Another record appeared, showing humans in the midst of war. Not wars meant to conquer other planets, but wars of survival, against natural disasters, disease, and sometimes against themselves. These records were detailed and precise. They showed humans making impossible choices, improvising solutions, and enduring when others would have fallen. Entire fleets had been destroyed and colonies wiped out. Yet humanity persisted. Again and again they rebuilt what had been lost. The instructors murmured among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Some frowned. One older instructor, who had studied interstellar species for 50 years, whispered, I thought this was myth. It wasn't real. Humans never achieved this level of endurance in our records." The archives continued to reveal more examples. Humans had colonized planets with harsh climates, planets where the atmosphere was almost unbreathable, or where storms destroyed every structure within hours. They had survived plagues that wiped out other species entirely. They had faced economic collapses and social revolutions, civil conflicts and invasions, and yet, somehow, they endured. Every time humans had learned, adapted, and survived. They never sought to dominate, never aimed to control the galaxy, they simply survived everything meant to erase them. Aaron's eyes followed the streams of information. For the first time in his life, he began to understand why the scan had labeled him as founder level. It was not about strength or speed or intelligence. It was about endurance. Humanity had survived when every other species, including some far stronger, had failed. The system had measured not just his abilities, but the legacy of every human before him. One instructor, a woman named Clara Finch, stepped closer to the display. She pointed at one of the logs. "Look at this," she said. "The human fleet here was outnumbered 10 to 1. Every ship should have been destroyed. But they survived, every single one of them. How is that possible?" Aaron shook his head. "We don't know. We just keep going. We find a way or we don't survive." The cadets leaned closer to the floating holograms. They could see humans building advanced technology under extreme conditions, surviving attacks from predators they did not understand, and adapting to environments that no other species could endure. There were no celebrations of conquest, no monuments to power, only a quiet record of persistence and survival. Reltan moved closer to Aaron. He had always been calm and measured, but now he seemed uneasy. "So humans never dominated?" he asked. Aaron shook his head again. "No. We survive. That's all we do. We adapt. We endure. We rebuild. That's what humans have always done." Another record appeared. It showed humans leaving their home planet centuries ago, exploring the stars with nothing but limited ships and resources. Colonies had failed. Others had succeeded. The ones that failed were not forgotten, they had been learned from. Every mistake, every disaster, every failure had become a lesson. Humans were never perfect. They never had super strength or natural weapons like some species. But they had something stronger. They had persistence. They had the ability to endure when others could not. Aaron felt a strange calm wash over him as he watched these records. For most of his life, humans had been underestimated. Other species looked down on them, dismissed them, assumed they were weak or ordinary. And yet here they were, standing quietly in the academy, with the entire history of survival unfolding before him. The cadets began to murmur again. Why didn't anyone know this? One asked. Clara Finch shook her head. Most of it was lost, she said softly. Humans left records, but they were scattered. Some civilizations ignored them. Some destroyed them. Others thought they were myths. No one expected a human to be capable of this level of endurance. Aaron nodded slightly. He had always known that humans had survived impossible situations. That was part of their history, part of their identity. But seeing it laid out like this, in detailed records with images, logs, and statistics, it was overwhelming. The galaxy had almost forgotten what humans were capable of. The chief instructor, Reltan, finally spoke again. His voice was low but filled with awe. Aaron, do you understand what this means? Your species, humans, they've survived more than any other. They've faced extinction multiple times and came back. The system is not mistaken. You are extraordinary not because of strength or combat skill but because of endurance. You are the last surviving link in a chain no other species could maintain. Aaron looked down at his hands. He did not feel extraordinary. He felt ordinary. Yet, somehow, the scans, the archives, and the instructor's words were telling him otherwise. Humans had survived when others could not. Humans had endured wars, disasters, disease, and natural disasters. Humans had quietly built themselves up again and again. Another record appeared, showing humans interacting with other species over centuries. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as negotiators, survivors, explorers. They had faced attacks, betrayal, and challenges that could have wiped them out. And every time they had learned, adapted, and continued. A young cadet whispered, "They don't even fight to dominate. They just survive everything." Aaron nodded. That was the truth. Humans did not fight to be the strongest. They did not fight to be feared. They fought and they endured because that was the only way to exist. The archives displayed a final sequence. It showed humans in modern times at the edge of the galaxy, surviving on harsh planets with limited resources. They had learned to adapt technology, to cooperate with one another, and to endure conditions that would have destroyed almost every other species. Every single record confirmed one thing: humans were survivors. They did not dominate. They did not conquer. They simply endured, and in doing so they left a legacy that no other species could match. Aaron stood silently as history rewrote itself around him. The cadets and instructors watched in awe. They had come to the academy to observe, to train, and to learn. Instead, they were witnessing the quiet truth of humanity revealed. For the first time, Aaron realized why the scan had labeled him as a founder-level human. It was not about him alone. It was about every human who had ever lived, every human who had survived impossible conditions, every human who had quietly endured when others had fallen. The system had recognized the strength of a species, not just an individual. Reltan stepped forward. "Aaron," he said softly, "you carry the legacy of your entire species. You stand here not just as a cadet, but as a symbol of everything humans have endured. The Academy, the galaxy, they have underestimated your people for far too long." Aaron felt a mixture of pride and humility. He had always known humans were underestimated. He had always known they survived when others failed. But seeing it all laid out like this, it was overwhelming. The cadets whispered among themselves, some in awe, some in disbelief. No one spoke loudly. They were all aware that they were witnessing something remarkable. Aaron had not changed. He had not become stronger or faster or smarter in that moment. But the recognition of his species' endurance had changed everything. The Academy would never look at humans the same way again. Every instructor, every cadet, every record had confirmed it. Humans were not ordinary. Humans did not simply survive. They endured against every challenge, and in doing so they became something more than anyone had expected. And Aaron, standing quietly on the platform, understood that for the first time. The galaxy had been reminded that humans were not a species to be underestimated. Aaron Cole stood on the platform, the faint hum of the scanners still vibrating through the hall. The other cadets had stepped back, giving him space, but their eyes never left him. Even the instructors were silent, watching carefully, as though trying to measure something that no sensor could detect. Finally, Instructor Reltan spoke. His voice was steady, but there was a weight to it that made everyone lean in closer. Aaron, explain yourself. Explain humans. How can your species survive what others cannot? How can you endure so much? Aaron paused, considering his words. He did not want to boast, nor did he want to sound arrogant. He had been underestimated his entire life, and humans had survived because they had always been quiet, careful, and clever. So he spoke plainly, with the simplicity that humans valued. Humans plan for failure, he said. His voice was calm, firm, and clear. We don't assume things will go our way. We prepare for everything that can go wrong. We imagine what could happen and we make a plan. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But at least we are ready. The instructors and cadets murmured among themselves. Some nodded slowly. Others exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe him. It was not a strategy they were used to. Most species relied on strength, speed, or power. Humans relied on planning, on foresight, on expecting the worst and hoping it didn't happen. But if it did, being ready. Aaron continued. We train for loss, not for victory. Winning is optional. Surviving is not. We do not try to be the strongest or the fastest. We try to stay alive, to keep going when others have fallen. That is what humans do. The words hung in the air. Simple, direct, and yet they carried a weight that no one could ignore. The cadets whispered quietly to each other, trying to understand. The instructors looked at one another, some in disbelief, some in awe. They had studied humans for decades, but none of them had ever heard such a clear explanation. Reltan stepped closer. He was still trying to measure Aaron against what he thought possible. So you are saying, he said slowly, that humans survive not because they fight better, or because they are stronger, or because they are faster, but because you always adapt? Aaron nodded. Exactly. We adapt. We learn. We change when we must. We use every tool we have. Every experience, every mistake, every disaster, we learn from it. That is why humans survive. Not because we dominate. Not because we conquer. But because we endure. The cadets leaned in, fascinated. A young cadet named Sophie whispered, So, humans are dangerous not because they attack, but because they survive everything? Aaron gave a small smile. Yes, that is exactly it. We do not need to fight to dominate. We do not need to win every battle. We need to be here when others are gone. That is our strength. Clara Finch, one of the senior instructors, stepped forward. She had been watching quietly, her face thoughtful. So the scan is not wrong, she said slowly. It is measuring your species as a whole. The founder-level classification. It is not just about physical or mental ability. It is about endurance, the ability to survive, to adapt, to continue when everything else fails. Aaron nodded again. I think that is right. Humans have survived plagues, wars, disasters, even collapse of governments and colonies. We always find a way. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it is hard. Sometimes we fail. But we keep going. That is what humans do. The room was silent for a moment, each cadet and instructor processing what he had said. It was not the kind of brilliance they expected. It was quiet. It was subtle. But it was terrifying in its own way. Humans were not dangerous because they could overpower an enemy. They were dangerous because they could outlast them. Reltan's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Aaron. So humans are not the fastest, not the strongest, not the most intelligent, but they are the most persistent. Is that what you are saying? Aaron shrugged. I think so. We do not aim to be the best in the galaxy. We aim to be here tomorrow and the next day and the next. That is all we have ever wanted. That is all we have ever done. The other cadets shifted uncomfortably. Some had been trained to rely on power, speed, or special abilities. They were strong, clever, and fast. But humans had something different. Something they could not measure with weapons, sensors, or drills. Humans had patience. Humans had endurance. Humans had the ability to survive when all else failed. Sophie whispered again. So, that is why the scan called him founder level. Because humans survive what others can't. Aaron nodded again quietly. Yes, that is why. It is not about fighting well. It is about surviving when no one else can. Clara Finch shook her head slowly. I think I understand now. Humans are not dangerous because they attack or fight better than us. They are dangerous because they endure. Because they adapt. Because they survive when others fail. That is remarkable. Aaron looked around the hall. Cadets and instructors were watching him with a mixture of awe and caution. He did not feel remarkable. He had only done what his species had always done. He had survived, adapted, and prepared for what could go wrong. That was human nature. That was what made them strong in ways no sensor could measure. Reltan took a deep breath. Aaron, do you realize what this means? Your species, humans, they have been underestimated for centuries. Every other species thought they knew humans. But now we see that we were wrong. They are not to be dismissed. They are something else entirely. Aaron nodded. I think that is true. We were never the strongest or the fastest. But we survive. We endure. And that is why we are here. Another cadet, a young man named Leo, looked at Aaron with wide eyes. So, humans don't fight to win. They fight to survive. Aaron smiled faintly. Exactly. Winning is nice. Feels good. But it is not the goal. Surviving is the goal. Everything else comes after. The instructors whispered among themselves again. They had seen countless species, countless warriors and fighters, and yet humans had always been underestimated. Now they understood. Humans were not dangerous because of strength. They were dangerous because they could endure anything. They could adapt. They could survive when others had fallen. Aaron stayed on the platform, calm and composed. He did not need to prove himself. He did not need to fight or show off. The recognition was quiet but profound. Humans had survived the impossible before, and now the galaxy was beginning to understand why. Reltan finally nodded. Aaron, the scan has not been wrong. It has measured your species accurately. Founder level is not about combat alone. It is about survival, adaptation, and endurance. That is your species' greatest strength. Aaron remained silent. Words were unnecessary. The scans, the instructors' reactions, and the whispers of the cadets all spoke the truth. Humans were not ordinary. Humans did not need to dominate. Humans endured. That was all they had ever needed. And in that quiet hall, with cadets and instructors watching him, Aaron realized that humans had been underestimated for centuries. Not because they were weak, but because their true strength, endurance, adaptation, survival, was invisible to most. Now the galaxy was beginning to notice. The hall was quiet after Aaron's explanation. The instructors whispered among themselves, sharing glances full of awe and uncertainty. They had never seen a human speak so plainly, so honestly, and yet convey the depth of their species' endurance. Reltan cleared his throat. Aaron, he said slowly, we need to test this further. We need to see how well your species adapts, not just how it survives history but in real time. A simulation will be run. It is designed to challenge any cadet beyond their limits. It is unsolvable for almost every species. Aaron nodded. He had prepared himself for drills before, but nothing like this. Nothing designed to overwhelm every ability he had, every skill he possessed. He did not feel fear. Humans rarely did. They focused. They analyzed. They prepared. That was their way. The simulation room opened automatically. Lights flashed and holographic displays projected a scenario into the hall. It was a crisis of massive proportions. Entire city sections were collapsing, energy grids were failing, communication systems were down, and hundreds of civilians, virtual but realistic, were in danger. Every cadet watching immediately realized that no single cadet from any species, had ever completed such a test successfully. Aaron stepped forward. He did not run, did not panic, did not attempt to overpower the system with brute strength. He assessed it calmly. He moved slowly to a control panel, observing every indicator. Alarms flashed red and yellow, systems were failing and time was running out. Most cadets would have frozen. Most cadets would have tried to force the situation, pushing systems to fail faster, focusing on victory over strategy. Not Aaron. He took a deep breath and began working systematically. First, he stabilized the power grids. Not with speed but with careful planning. He rerouted energy in a way that prevented overloads and protected essential systems. Then he addressed communications. He didn't try to restore everything at once. He prioritized emergency channels first. The civilians in danger could be guided out before anything else. The holographic simulations shifted and adjusted, creating new problems as if aware that Aaron was still in control. Systems that were failing now generated cascading failures. Most cadets would have panicked, trying to fight every problem at once. Aaron did not. He adapted. He created fallback plans within fallback plans. Every action was measured, precise, and deliberate. One of the instructors whispered to another, "I've never seen anything like this." Most species would have failed within minutes. This human He's not even trying to overpower it. He's just keeping it together. The simulation intensified. Holographic storms tore across the city, fires broke out, and buildings started to collapse. Energy systems fluctuated violently, and civilians moved unpredictably through the chaos. Other cadets were stepping back, feeling overwhelmed, uncertain how to react. Aaron remained calm. He observed patterns, predicted failures, and acted with patience. He stabilized one system at a time, preventing complete collapse. He contained potential disasters before they could spread. He directed holographic civilians to safety, using routes that minimized risk. He anticipated chain reactions and blocked them before they started. Every action was not about winning the simulation, but about preserving what could be preserved. The instructors were silent, unable to take their eyes off him. They had designed the simulation to push every cadet past their limits, to test them against impossible odds. And yet, here was a human acting with patience and strategy, not by overpowering the scenario but by outlasting it. Clara Finch, one of the senior instructors, finally spoke in a low voice. He's not winning. He's not conquering. He's surviving everything at once. He's containing it, preserving it. That's human nature, isn't it? Aaron did not reply. He simply focused. He adapted to every new variable the system created. One building on the holographic display began to collapse faster than predicted. He rerouted emergency support to stabilize it. A fire spread unpredictably, threatening a civilian group. He calculated the best path to minimize harm, coordinating every step. The simulation was relentless. The system tried to overwhelm him at every turn. New crises appeared randomly. Sensor failures, energy surges, civilian panic, structural collapses. It was impossible for any cadet to control fully. Yet Aaron remained calm. The other cadets were stunned. They had never seen patience used as a weapon. They had never seen strategy as endurance. Rel Tan finally stepped closer to the simulation controls, his hands hovering over the override panels. He shouldn't be able to do this, he muttered. No one should. The scenario is unsolvable. Aaron ignored him. He focused on what could be controlled. Systems that were failing were stabilized. Civilians in danger were guided to safety. Chain reactions that could have destroyed entire sectors were blocked before they began. The system created problems faster than a normal cadet could solve them, but Aaron's calm persistence allowed him to stay one step ahead. Time passed, though it felt both fast and slow. The simulation was designed to push cadets to exhaustion, to force mistakes, to create panic. Other cadets would have failed in moments, their nerves frayed, their plans falling apart. Aaron stayed composed. He adjusted, adapted, and preserved. Finally, the simulation's timer ran out. The system paused. The holographic display froze mid-crisis. Alarms fell silent. The hall was quiet except for the faint hum of the machinery. The instructors held their breath, staring at the results. The system recorded a result it rarely used. On the main display, words appeared in bold letters. Situation preserved. There was a moment of stunned silence. Situation preserved? Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. No cadet, no one has ever achieved that. Aaron stepped back slightly from the controls. He was calm, composed, and steady, though inside, a small part of him recognized the gravity of what had just happened. Humans did not always win. Humans did not always dominate. But they endured. They preserved what could be preserved, adapted to what needed adaptation, and survived when others could not. Rel Tan finally exhaled slowly, leaning back. It's remarkable, he said. He didn't overpower the simulation. He didn't break it or conquer it. He preserved it. He contained everything the scenario threw at him and made it survive. That is human endurance. Aaron nodded quietly. He had done what humans always did. He had not tried to show off. He had not tried to win. He had only ensured that what could survive, did survive. That was the quiet strength of humans, the trait that no sensor could measure, the skill no simulation could anticipate. Clara Finch moved closer to Aaron, looking at the display. This proves what we have been seeing. Humans are not dangerous because they fight better or faster than us. They are dangerous because they adapt. They endure. They preserve life when others cannot. That is the real founder-level trait. Other cadets exchanged stunned glances. Some were afraid, some were in awe, some could not believe what they had witnessed. They had trained for years, learned strategies, mastered combat, and yet a single human had achieved a result they had thought impossible. Aaron looked around at them. He did not feel extraordinary. He felt ordinary. But he understood now why humans had survived for so long. It was not about power or skill or speed. It was about calm persistence. It was about careful thought and planning. It was about patience and endurance. And when the galaxy underestimated humans, that quiet strength became their most powerful weapon. The instructors began to take notes, discussing the simulation in low voices. They would need to review this to understand it, to integrate it into training. Humans had proven something fundamental. Winning was optional. Surviving, preserving, and adapting was essential. That was the lesson no one else had understood. Aaron stepped off the platform, leaving the frozen holographic simulation behind. He did not celebrate. He did not boast. He simply walked calmly back toward the edge of the hall, allowing the cadets and instructors to process what they had just seen. Rel Tan followed him, his expression a mixture of awe and respect. "Aaron," he said, "this changes everything. Not just for you but for humanity. We have underestimated your species for too long. You have proven that the galaxy cannot ignore humans. Not now, not ever again." Aaron nodded quietly. He had only done what humans always did. They adapted, they endured, they survived. And in doing so, they quietly became something more than the galaxy had ever realized. The cadets and instructors watched him leave, understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Not a display of brute force, not a demonstration of speed or intelligence, but the quiet, relentless, unshakable persistence of humans. Situation preserved. And in that moment, the meaning of those words became clear to everyone in the hall. Humans did not need to dominate. They did not need to overpower. They only needed to endure. The academy was quieter than usual the next morning. Even the cadets who were not present during the scan and the simulation could sense the change in the air. Word traveled fast in a place like this, and the story of Aaron Cole, the human cadet who had been labeled founder level, spread like a ripple through every training hall, every classroom, and every observation deck. The instructors gathered in the central command room, discussing the results, trying to understand what had just happened. Their discussions were not about speed, strength, or reflexes. They were about endurance, adaptation, and persistence. Humanity, they realized, was something no system could fully measure. No combat algorithm could predict it. No drill could challenge it. Humans were anchors. Rel Tan sat at the head of the table, tapping a finger against the console. "We've been underestimating them," he said quietly. "All of our classifications, all of our historical records, they never accounted for this. Humans survive when everything else fails. They endure when every other species falls apart. They adapt to impossible conditions. They preserve what others cannot. That is their true strength." Clara Finch leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Not soldiers. Not conquerors. Anchors. That is what they are. They hold things together even when chaos strikes. They are the foundation others can rely on whether they realize it or not. And now, we have seen it firsthand." The Academy archives had been updated automatically after Aaron's scans and the simulation. The label Founder-Level Human now appeared alongside a new classification, Anchor Species. It was a term the Academy had never used before. It was not about war or combat. It was about persistence, adaptation, and survival. Humans had been elevated not for strength or aggression, but for the quiet power that had allowed their species to endure for millennia. Aaron walked through the hall, leaving the platform behind. Cadets and instructors gave him space, though many watched in awe. Some whispered, some stared openly, and some tried to hide the shock on their faces. The atmosphere was different. Where there had once been routine drills and standard assessments, there was now respect, curiosity, and something deeper, understanding. As he moved down the corridor, Aaron thought about what had just happened. The scans had been accurate. The simulation had been passed, not through overwhelming force but through careful thought, adaptation, and persistence. Humans did not need to win in the traditional sense. They only needed to endure, to adapt, and to preserve what they could. That had been the lesson of the scan, the simulation, and his time at the Academy. He passed a group of cadets huddled around a display showing the results of the simulation. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale with awe. One of them, a young man named Theo, turned to his companion and whispered, "Did you see that? He didn't fight to win. He just survived everything." Aaron smiled faintly, though there was no pride in it. That was humans, he thought. Quiet, persistent, unnoticed until someone took the time to see it. Humans did not seek glory. They sought survival. And when survival was achieved, everything else could follow. The instructors watched him leave, their minds still processing the implications. Clara Finch shook her head slowly. "We've trained cadets for decades," she said quietly. "We've prepared for every scenario we could imagine. And yet, one human cadet has reminded us that there are things we cannot predict. That strength is not always visible. That endurance is the real power." Reltan nodded. "The galaxy has underestimated humanity for too long. But now we cannot. They will have their place not as soldiers but as stabilizers, anchors. Wherever things are falling apart, wherever survival is in doubt, humans will be there. And we will finally understand why they endure when everyone else fails." Aaron reached the end of the hall and looked back once, seeing the monitors, the instructors, and the cadets still watching him. He did not feel exceptional. He did not feel different. He had only done what humans had always done: plan, adapt, survive, and endure. That was what made them remarkable. That was what had earned the label founder level. That was what had made them anchors. Outside the academy, the skies were clear, the stars bright. Aaron paused for a moment, feeling the vastness of the galaxy spread out before him. Humanity had always been underestimated. Other species had assumed humans were weak, ordinary, or unremarkable. They had been wrong. Humans had endured plagues, wars, disasters, and near extinction. They had survived, rebuilt, and quietly shaped their destiny without seeking recognition. The scan had not been wrong. It had measured what no one had expected: the persistence, resilience, and adaptability of an entire species. And the galaxy had forgotten, or perhaps had never fully realized, what humans were truly capable of. Now the record had been corrected. The archives had been updated. The recognition was official. Aaron continued walking, his steps steady, calm, and deliberate. He did not need applause or acknowledgement. Humans had never needed it. They did not seek glory or fame. They sought to survive. And in doing so, they became something more profound than most species could understand. As he reached the exit of the academy, he glanced one last time at the hall where the scan and simulation had taken place. The displays still showed the results, the new classification, the record of his species' endurance. It was a quiet testament not to power or speed or intelligence, but to patience, persistence, and survival. Aaron stepped outside, the cool air brushing against his face. He felt the weight of what had happened but also the calm of understanding. Humans were no longer a forgotten species, underestimated and overlooked. They had been acknowledged, not as conquerors, not as fighters, but as something far more enduring. Anchors. The galaxy had finally remembered. The scan had completed. The simulation had been recorded. Every result confirmed the same truth: humanity survived when all others faltered. They adapted when all others broke. They endured when all others failed. And in doing so, they became the quiet, unshakable force the galaxy had forgotten existed. Aaron walked on, blending into the crowd outside the academy, ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in essence. The stars shone above him, infinite and indifferent, yet humans had proven that endurance mattered, that survival mattered, and that even in the vastness of space, one species could quietly hold its place against all odds. The academy had reclassified humanity. The galaxy had been reminded. And Aaron, like all humans, had simply done what humans had always done: survive, adapt, and endure. It had not been a victory in the traditional sense. There had been no battle won, no enemy defeated, no glory sought. Yet the result was more profound than any victory could be. Humans had endured. Humans had been recognized. Humans were anchors. And as the academy and the galaxy adjusted to this truth, Aaron walked into the future, calm, composed, and quietly aware that humans would continue to endure long after other species had been forgotten. It hadn't been wrong. The galaxy had just forgotten.